World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, raged from 1939 to 1945. It engulfed the globe, drawing over 30 countries into a maelstrom of unprecedented destruction and chaos. The war pitted the Axis powers, led by Germany, Italy, and Japan, against the Allies, spearheaded by Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Fueled by ideologies of hate and expansionism, the war claimed over 70 million lives, leaving an indelible mark on the 20th century and beyond. From the beaches of Normandy to the dense jungles of the Pacific, the world witnessed unimaginable brutality and sacrifice. This global conflict reshaped political boundaries, redefined international relations, and ushered in the atomic age. The echoes of World War II continue to reverberate today, shaping our understanding of conflict, diplomacy, and the fragility of peace. The war's legacy serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of extremism and the imperative of international cooperation. It also highlights the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring pursuit of freedom, justice, and peace. The seeds of World War II were sown in the aftermath of World War I. The devastation and loss experienced during the Great War left deep scars on the nations involved, both physically and psychologically. The world was desperate for peace, but the path to lasting stability was fraught with challenges. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles, intended to ensure peace, instead fostered resentment and instability. The treaty imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including significant territorial losses, military restrictions, and crippling reparations. These measures were meant to prevent future aggression, but instead sowed the seeds of bitterness and economic hardship. Germany, burdened by crippling reparations and territorial losses, became fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. The Weimar Republic struggled to maintain control as hyperinflation and unemployment soared, leading to widespread discontent among the German populace. This environment of despair and frustration created a breeding ground for radical political movements. The global economic depression of the 1930s exacerbated these tensions, creating widespread hardship and disillusionment. The economic collapse was not confined to Germany. It spread across the world, affecting millions. In the United States, breadlines and soup kitchens became common sights, while in Europe, political instability grew as governments struggled to cope with the crisis. In this climate of despair, charismatic leaders like Adolf Hitler in Germany, Benito Mussolini in Italy, and Emperor Hirohito in Japan rose to power. These leaders promised to restore national pride, economic stability, and territorial expansion. They exploited the fears and frustrations of their people, offering simple solutions to complex problems. These totalitarian regimes, driven by nationalism, militarism, and expansionist ambitions, challenged the existing world order. They sought to overturn the post-World War I international system and establish their dominance. Military parades and nationalist rallies became tools to galvanize public support and demonstrate their power. Hitler, fueled by a toxic ideology of racial superiority, sought to establish a German-dominated Europe. His vision of a greater Germany involved the annexation of territories and the subjugation of peoples he deemed inferior. Nazi propaganda and rallies were used to spread his message and rally the German people behind his cause. Mussolini, yearning for a revival of the Roman Empire, embarked on a campaign of conquest in Africa. He believed that Italy's destiny was to dominate the Mediterranean and reclaim its ancient glory. His aggressive foreign policy led to the invasion of Ethiopia, showcasing Italy's military might and ambition. In the Far East, Japan, under the banner of Imperial expansion, aimed to secure resources and dominance in Asia. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931 marked the beginning of Japan's aggressive expansionist policy. Emperor Hirohito and his military leaders sought to create a vast empire, believing it was essential for Japan's survival and prosperity. These aggressive ambitions, unchecked by a weakened League of Nations, set the stage for another global conflict. The League, established to maintain peace, proved ineffective in curbing the actions of these totalitarian regimes. Diplomatic efforts failed to prevent the escalation of tensions, and the world inched closer to war. The world watched with growing apprehension as the storm clouds gathered, casting a long shadow over the hard-won peace. The memories of World War I were still fresh, and the prospect of another devastating conflict loomed large. Nations braced themselves for the inevitable, knowing that the fragile peace was on the brink of collapse. On September 1st, 1939, the world watched in horror as German forces stormed across the Polish border, marking the beginning of World War II. This invasion was not just a military maneuver, but a calculated move by Adolf Hitler to expand the Third Reich's territory and influence. The meticulously planned operation caught the world off guard, despite the growing tensions in Europe. The invasion was swift and brutal, leaving Poland scrambling to defend itself against the overwhelming might of the German war machine. Hitler's Blitzkrieg, a lightning war strategy employing tanks, planes, and overwhelming force, shattered the relative peace that had settled over Europe. The Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, was designed to create disarray and confusion among enemy forces, making it nearly impossible for them to mount a coordinated defense. This strategy relied heavily on speed and surprise, with coordinated attacks from the air and ground that left the Polish forces reeling. The effectiveness of Blitzkrieg was evident as Polish defenses crumbled under the relentless assault. The invasion of Poland, a blatant act of aggression, triggered a chain reaction. Cities were bombed, civilians were caught in the crossfire, and the Polish military was quickly overwhelmed. The sheer scale of the destruction was unprecedented, with entire towns reduced to rubble. The Polish government, realizing the dire situation, called upon its allies for assistance, but the response was slow and inadequate. The world watched in shock as Poland was systematically dismantled by the German forces. Great Britain and France, bound by treaties to defend Poland's sovereignty, declared war on Germany 2 days later. This declaration marked the official start of World War II, as nations around the globe began to choose sides. The leaders of Britain and France, Neville Chamberlain and Édouard Daladier, faced immense pressure to act, knowing that their response would shape the course of the conflict. Their decision to declare war was a pivotal moment, signaling that the era of appeasement was over and that the fight against fascism had begun in earnest. The fragile peace, painstakingly constructed in the aftermath of World War I, lay in ruins. The Treaty of Versailles, which had aimed to prevent another global conflict, was now a distant memory. The hopes for lasting peace were dashed as the world plunged into another devastating war. The lessons of the past seemed to have been forgotten, and the international community was once again faced with the horrors of large-scale conflict. The world, still reeling from the horrors of the previous global conflict, found itself once again on the brink of an even more devastating war. The memories of World War I were still fresh in the minds of many, and the prospect of another such conflict was almost too much to bear. Civilians across Europe and beyond braced themselves for the impact, knowing that the coming years would bring untold suffering and hardship. The sense of dread was palpable as nations prepared for the inevitable escalation. Germany's invasion of Poland was not merely an attack on a nation, but an assault on the very principles of international law and order. It challenged the foundations of the post-World War I international system, which had been built on the idea of collective security and the rule of law. The invasion demonstrated the limitations of the League of Nations and the failure of diplomatic efforts to contain aggressive powers. It was a stark reminder that the world was still vulnerable to the ambitions of dictators and the ravages of war. It signaled the beginning of a conflict that would test the limits of human endurance and reshape the geopolitical landscape for generations to come. The scale and intensity of World War II would surpass anything the world had seen before, with battles raging across continents and involving millions of soldiers and civilians. The war would bring about profound changes in technology, society, and international relations, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to shape the world today. As the world braced for the inevitable escalation, the fate of millions hung in the balance. Families were torn apart, cities were evacuated, and the future seemed uncertain. The human cost of the conflict was staggering, with countless lives lost and communities destroyed. The invasion of Poland was just the beginning of a long and arduous journey that would test the resilience and resolve of people around the globe. The world stood on the precipice of a new era, one that would be defined by the struggle for survival and the quest for peace. The early years of World War II in Europe were marked by a series of stunning German victories. The world watched in shock and awe as the German war machine, under the command of Adolf Hitler, unleashed a new form of warfare that would change the face of combat forever. Hitler's blitzkrieg tactics proved devastatingly effective, overwhelming opponents and conquering vast swathes of territory in rapid succession. This lightning war, characterized by rapid movements of infantry, tanks and air support, left the Allied forces scrambling to respond. The speed and ferocity of the German attacks caught many nations off guard, leading to quick and decisive victories for the Nazis. Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium and France all fell under the Nazi jackboot. Each of these countries, despite their efforts to resist, were no match for the well-coordinated and relentless German assault. The fall of France, in particular, was a significant blow to the Allies, as it left Britain standing alone against the Axis powers in Western Europe. The Battle of Britain, a fierce air campaign waged over the skies of England, showcased the courage and resilience of the British people, who refused to surrender to German aggression. Despite relentless bombing raids by the Luftwaffe, the Royal Air Force managed to hold the line, preventing a German invasion. The British spirit of defiance was epitomized by Prime Minister Winston Churchill's famous words, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." However, the tide of war began to turn in 1941 with Germany's ill-fated invasion of the Soviet Union. This ambitious campaign, known as Operation Barbarossa, aimed to crush the Soviet Union and secure vast territories for the Third Reich. The initial stages of the invasion saw significant German advances, but the vastness of the Soviet landscape and the tenacity of its defenders soon began to take their toll. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's colossal gamble to conquer the Soviet Union, proved to be a fatal miscalculation. The German forces were not prepared for the harsh Russian winter, and their supply lines were stretched thin. The Soviet Union, under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, mobilized its vast resources and manpower to mount a fierce resistance. The brutal winter conditions, combined with the determined Soviet defense, turned the tide against the Germans. The vast distances, harsh climate, and fierce resistance of the Soviet people sapped the strength of the German army. The initial rapid advances slowed to a grinding halt as the Germans found themselves bogged down in a war of attrition. The resilience and determination of the Soviet soldiers, combined with the strategic depth of their homeland, created insurmountable challenges for the invaders. The Battle of Stalingrad, a brutal months-long siege, became a turning point in the war, marking the beginning of Germany's decline in the east. This epic confrontation saw some of the most intense urban warfare in history, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad not only shattered the myth of German invincibility, but also boosted the morale of the Allied forces. It was a testament to the Soviet Union's ability to endure and ultimately repel the Nazi onslaught. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, Allied forces, bolstered by the entry of the United States into the war after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, prepared for a massive counteroffensive. The American industrial might and manpower provided a significant boost to the Allied war effort. Plans were laid for a large-scale invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, culminating in the D-Day landings in Normandy. This marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's ambitions, as the Allies began to push back against the Axis powers on multiple fronts.